Welcome back to another episode of Rocket 9 Live. Today's topic is Agile for Marketing. How about that? And today we're delighted because we have the expert with us, Stacey Ackerman. Hello, Stacey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Stacey's Twitter handle is Agile for Marketers, and her company is called Agilify Coaching and Training. Also today we have Cliff Rosa from Rocket 9. Hello, Cliff.
Woo! Hey,
yeah.
Rick.
And Chris Hurney. Hi, Chris.
Hey, everyone. How you doing?
Great to see all of you. Of course, Chris is on the Agile Coffee podcast often with me, so we'll have information on that. Cliff can be found at Mr. Rosa 2 on Twitter, and Chris is Chris_Hurney on Twitter. So let's just dive into it. We've got a number of topics. We'll be using today a modified lean coffee format, revolving around the main topic of Agile for Marketing. Really great topic because when I'm teaching classes, I teach usually Scrum classes, and in every class just about there's somebody in there who's talking about their role in an organization as a marketing person or as a part of a group that does marketing, or maybe their entire organization is around something that's marketing focused. And I know marketing kind of is a very large term. It encompasses a lot of different things. So we've got a number of questions that we can start asking, but I just kind of want to turn it over maybe to Stacey to give us, if you can, just an introduction to what it is you do and what are some of the problems you try to solve.
All right. Well, I help marketers become more agile. I was a marketer myself for more than 15 years before I learned Agile in the software space. And in the last few years, I've really been bringing that back to marketing, realizing that business agility really requires Agile to go beyond software. And being that I have that marketing background and have that Agile transformation background, I'm really using both of those to meet a market that's really eager to learn, but at the very early stages of its adoption.
Yeah, thanks for that. That sounds so fascinating. Gosh, I sometimes I wish I was in like your shoes or in the setting of marketing in general. So I'm really looking forward to this next hour. I'm just going to start by reading some of the questions that we've got, and we'll spend a few minutes on each and see if we need to, add more questions as we go. But the first question, Chris, this is yours actually. It says that in an Agile environment, how does a sales and marketing person become aware of what they need to do or you need to do if you're a sales and marketing in a group like that? So what are the things that you need to do? Or maybe Chris, if you want to elaborate on that question, that's fine too.
I'm glad Stacey brought up business agility because that is a term in the grand scheme of organizational agility that we've only sort of recently started hearing, maybe the last few years. And to me, it's always seemed that if we're not striving for business agility, if we're just wrapping our agility up in engineering, there are all these other sort of bureaucratic, traditional, stage-gated inputs into engineering. So how much are we really going to move the needle in our organization if only our software development teams are agile, right? And so my question to Stacey, and I guess this sort of transcends marketing, but marketing is one of those outward business units that has input into engineering. How does marketing and those other outward business units, how do they know that they need to be a part of this movement towards a more lean and agile mindset? What does that look like in an organization with all these other business units?
Yeah, well, in marketing specifically, when I learned marketing, it was a long time ago, and we learned about pushing messages to customers. And marketing was a very one-directional, very corporate-centric, and the mentality of buy it and they will come. And we spent a long time in boardrooms planning one-year marketing campaigns, 5-year marketing campaigns, whatever that will be. Marketing has changed drastically right now to the fact that it's so personalized, it's so one-on-one with customers, and it's very responsive, or needs to be very responsive in very real time. And there's so many marketing messages out there that having kind of that one size fits all approach that's very company centric no longer works. And whether marketers realize that Agile can fix that or not, they do realize that that is a problem. And most of these companies haven't adopted their internal marketing practices at nearly the rate of speed in which marketing has moved. One thing before the pandemic, though, that we were uncovering in some research is the whole VUCA paradigm, that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, as a really big paradigm shift in why marketing needs to change. And for my clients that were sort of on that cusp of changing, when COVID happened, they really were forced to change. And I think that that's true really for any industry. But one client in particular I was working with worked in healthcare, and all of this they had to communicate about COVID in real time. And they had to use agility. They had to rapidly deploy daily communications out there in an environment that was changing so quickly. So more and more are realizing that to survive right now, this is really, really important.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing is that it's not necessarily that engineering people have this agile expertise and they're going around the organization saying you have to jump on board. What I'm hearing from you is that marketing is sort of out of self-preservation, realizing on their own the need to be more nimble and more agile with their approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it's pushed too much from software, there's a little bit of resistance that I'm seeing there going, hey, that's not for us. You guys, you keep with your software practices over there and let us marketers do our thing. And then it becomes less adopted. So we really need to approach marketers in a way that makes sense for them and meets their pain that they're experiencing right now.
That's funny.
So I'm just trying to understand, Stacey, does this mean that all the 1-year plans and the 5-year plans are pretty much, a thing of the past or out the window? Or how does this actually work kind of with, I mean, the previous way to do marketing?
Right. Overall, I don't think it's that much different than the software paradigm that we've seen, right? We're still going to have a high-level vision and a high-level strategy. That detailed planning just has to be a lot more real-time and a lot more as needed and flexible. So strategic marketing, it doesn't go away. It's how detailed we get with it. So previously, people would get really detailed. And I actually used to have a consulting company where I wrote marketing plans for people and I could do exactly this year. That approach no longer works, right? It's too locked down.
You know what's interesting about what you and Cliff just exchanged, Stacey, is it reminds me of, so a little background, Stacey and I both participate in Mike Cohn's Agile Mentors community. Stacey actually is the glue and the machine that keeps that thing going. But one thing that Mike said to me once about architecture, but I think it resonates with what you just said, is that the idea is that we can be both intentional and emergent at the same time. We can have these broader long-term roadmaps and goals, but we need to have that sort of real-time flexibility to deal with things as they emerge.
Right. One example would be like a content calendar that's very detailed. So a lot of times marketers would say, I'm going to, exactly plan 12 months or 6 months of content on my content calendar. Well, that's probably planning in too far of detail at this point in time, right? You can plan that you're going to deliver content every month or every week, but exactly what content you're going to deliver, you really need to see how the content you just delivered is resonating, what's changing in the environment around you. And so that flexibility is really important, especially in content strategy.
Chris, you have something that says, don't sell or don't market anything until it's built, and that's all in quotes.
Yeah, so this is a straightforward, no real elaboration needed. I learned this from the team at Hunter Industries. Background is here in Southern California, there's a group down in San Diego who practice mob programming, continue all the technical excellence practices you can think of, super effective, delivering to production every day. And one of their mottos for or agreements between engineering and sales is, don't sell anything until we've already built it. And I'm just wondering, from a marketing perspective, since marketing and sales are sort of joined at the hip in that way, what Stacey thinks about that idea.
Gosh, I don't know if I have any real strong opinion on that. I think if it's going to bite you in the end because you're selling something that maybe can't be built by engineering, right? Then you're disappointing customers and leaving false promises, or you might be imposing false deadlines on engineering. So we need to sell it for X date, but we don't have the product. On the other hand, it can be a good ploy a little bit to see if there's market interest before you build it. So I think that could go either way. And I like how you said you have an agreement between sales and engineering on it, because I think that's the biggest thing is you have to come to an agreement on what makes sense for both of you.
Do you, just to expand on that, do you see that when you train or coach marketing teams to be more agile, do you find that that's a common, perhaps, I guess, I don't know if I want to say dysfunction, but I will. Is that a common dysfunction? There's a lack of agreement? Is it more like marketing just says, hey, engineering, do what we tell you to do and don't ask questions? Or is that a typical challenge?
I think you're thinking, when you're thinking marketing, you're thinking of a specific segment, right, of sales, more like selling the product. And so I don't always run into those groups quite as often as other areas of marketing, like content strategists or social media marketers, or even product marketing people. So I haven't experienced that directly. One thing I did experience as a challenge actually working with a website team is that they were up and running with a lot of agility, but marketing wasn't yet. And so the timelines on promoting new features were not in sync. So if you think about that larger scale of business agility there, if your software teams are really great at delivering and your marketing teams can't keep up to actually promote the thing, or sell it, then there's a misalignment in that company that needs to be addressed.
I think I was first kind of introduced to kind of the newer way of marketing with agility back in kind of the lean startup book, that idea of the MVP and get out of the room. You can't get any good information in the building. You have to get out and talk to customers. So so the idea here is, again, that you can begin marketing earlier and getting that feedback. And that's kind of traditionally what marketers have done, but now they just see that it's more necessary to do that now in the age of agile transformations and the age of, like you said, the VUCA that you were studying, and the idea that that things just move so quickly these days. It's hard to keep pace and keep adapting.
Yeah, I would say the major difference now between, 10 years ago, 15 years ago with that is we used to do more formal focus groups, which were really what you call almost like a phase gate of marketing, right? Yes, they were getting out there and talking to customers. I don't think marketers have ever had a problem getting out there and talking to customers like maybe we see in software. The problem is we're spending too much upfront time talking to customers instead of actually delivering and getting that feedback and learning from what we've delivered. So trying to shift that into shorter cycles is what's important.
You know what's really interesting about what you just said is I recently worked with at a fintech company a team that was called a growth team, and basically there was this financial app, and people would have to download the app and register and do things like link their bank account and so forth. And the metrics that would come back would give detail on when people dropped out of the registration process, and things like that. And so this growth team, their charter was to acquire more users. And they were constantly running small experiments, changing the UI, changing the language, changing the functionality of the registration piece to see if that really, increased engagement and increased people to go all the way through and complete the registration. And they were small, quick, like you were saying, Stacey, they were small, quick experiments. Put something quickly in the hands of the user using something like A/B testing, see how they react to it. If it works, productionize it. If it doesn't, discard it. And I was reading a blog recently about them calling this hypothesis-driven development. Let's form a hypothesis. Let's throw something out there to prove the statistical significance or disprove, and then just keep moving on. I think there's some synergy between that and what you're talking about, right? Like let's not let's not do the big upfront design with talking to customers. Let's get small things out there in their hands and see how they use it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do teach a lot of lean marketing concepts within my course. And so it's that whole idea of test, learn, iterate, test, learn, iterate. Where I see marketers sometimes falling down on this is they might do small experiments, but they don't actually build in time to use that data to discuss how they're going to pivot their strategy. So they're like, they test it and test it and test it and test it, right, and keep going. So that's the important piece of trying to build in, right? How are you gathering feedback? What are you doing with that feedback? And how are you going to incorporate it into your next marketing strategy? So I was working with a client, it was really interesting, that was trying to do content marketing. They were a large bank and they wanted to write travel articles, but they worked with an agency that says, here's the 12 travel articles, here's every single topic, put it in your backlog. And my question to them was, how do you know you need 12? How do you know 12 is the right number? Maybe you've hit your goal in 3. Maybe you need 30. Maybe your topic's way off. How are you going to learn and pivot, right? You're so specific on future content. So that's a big difference between just doing things small and doing things in a way that's adaptable and flexible. And we're going to use that information to pivot.
Cliff was asking here about the marketing class specifically, and if attendees in the class need to have a background in marketing or even a background in Agile, if that's the case.
Well, it's interesting, you know, so many of us end up in some element of marketing, especially content creation, things like that. And so, I was wondering how much of a kind of a professional or a formal marketing background folks ought to have to really get value out of this course.
Yeah, I mean, there's no like level of professional background needed. In fact, most people that are independent Agile training companies, right, we're all marketers in a sense too, right? We all have to market a business, and it is intended to be more of an introductory class to Agile, so it's meant for people that are kind of new to Agile, that are needing to apply it somehow in marketing and want some practical ways that it works there versus maybe traditionally in software. Now, I have had some Agile coaches come through just because they would like to work with marketing teams and they want to see how to work with them a little bit differently. So there is some benefit there. But the primary audience is kind of anybody in marketing that wants to learn what Agile is and how you work in micro campaigns, on how you break things smaller and how you get feedback and apply a test, learn, and measure strategy.
Some of the other questions that we had up here, I feel like we've covered. So let me just read them and we can summarize them if necessary, but I want to make sure that they were covered fully. So why do we think it's important for marketers to adopt Agile? I think we did talk about in the beginning, as well as how are marketers making Agile work for them? If you want to just kind of summarize an answer to both of those, like I said, I'm pretty sure that we covered it already, but if not, feel free to add in anything that we missed.
Yeah. So how are marketers making Agile work for them? I would say they tend to be more framework agnostic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we do see pure Scrum happening. The majority of marketers are using sort of a Scrum Kanban hybrid of sorts. I see them wanting to have flexibility in how they're going to adapt Agile a lot more. Another thing I've noticed in Agile marketing is most marketers don't do a lot of things like burn down charts or estimating. So those concepts are really, really new in that space. So we want to be careful not to kind of push people to too much of that stuff that IT people kind of love. But marketers might be like, I'm not so sure about this. It is still really new in this space, and so there's a lot of education I think that needs to be done around it. I think Agile marketing is where Agile software was 10, 15 years ago, right? Kind of earlier in its adoption. And so there still needs to be a lot of education there that it is a mindset, it isn't a process that you go and you learn in 2 days and you change. The 2-day class is a great starting point for educating ourselves, because educating is always the first step to adoption. But it is a learning curve, marketers really want to understand how they can work with campaign strategies, how they can work in the kind of work that they do. So it is a little bit different, but overall, we're still trying to do the same thing. The values and principles, although there's an Agile Marketing Manifesto, are fundamentally the same. Right? We're trying to be more customer centric and responsive and working in real time to the environment which we're living in.
Did I just hear that no estimates is popular in marketing? Note to self, change careers.
I don't think if you said, quote, no estimates, they would know what you're talking about as far as the no estimates movement we're used to in the Agile community. But it is not a common practice to do that at all. But the problems that kind of do lie in there is marketers are very overloaded with work. They tend to just be about output. So we're trying to get away from that like output mindset. And it is important to build in some practices at some level to get more predictable and understand how much volume a team can take on.
Do you, something that you said triggered this question. Do you find that, in Agile for software developers, we talk a lot about the importance of cross-functional teams because there are a lot of specialists in the tech front end, back end data. Do you find that cross-functional people and teams is easier, harder, the same to achieve in marketing?
Honestly, I think overall it's about the same. I've heard both sides say, well, it's much harder in our space. Right, I've heard it from software, I've heard it from marketers. I think marketers have the same problem, right? They might be a graphic designer and they're very hung up on their craft, right? Like, I'm a graphic designer, I don't want anyone else touching graphic design. I'm a copywriter, I don't want to get into graphic design, whatever that may be. So specialists have been away in marketing for quite a long time. So breaking that and becoming cross-functional is definitely a challenge. I just interviewed a former client yesterday, and she said that was probably her biggest challenge with her team, because when they were hired for very specific skill sets.
You had mentioned a bit ago also about like we don't maybe hammer home the idea of burn down charts as well as the estimates there, but burn down charts made me think about the idea of visibility or transparency. Is there any best practice wrapped around making the work visible, specific to marketing work?
Yeah, I think first of all, they've not typically been in a tool where they're all collaborating in it and having that transparency even with that and having that board. I found Monday.com has been really popular with marketing teams. I personally haven't used it too much, but having that tool and having that transparency, having everything in one backlog. I mean, for starters, is a big change from the traditional way where everybody is very siloed and has their own work, which is really no different from software. It's kind of still the same concept.
We've got more questions. Cliff, you just threw one up. You want to read yours out?
As we've been talking about some of these, no estimates and mob programming, some of these things that are super well-known or becoming popular, getting traction in the Agile community. I was wondering if in terms of the Agile for Marketers class, are they going to be learning Kanban applied to marketing or Scrum applied to marketing, or is it some kind of broader mix of concepts?
Yeah. So we do a Scrum simulation using a marketing campaign in there. And we also talk about Kanban and go over the Kanban principles and how that would apply in marketing. And so it doesn't go as deep into a framework as like a CSM class would. It's a little bit more high level. We also talk on some lean principles as well in there.
So it sounds
Other
like it-
best practices. Chris, you're asking about best practices, like again, from the IT kind of agile side of things, any best practices that we could port over. And I think you've mentioned a few already, but is there anything else specifically that you were looking for, Chris?
Well, I think my question, that specific question, was mostly covered. It was sort of the ideas, concepts, techniques, behaviors that Stacey teaches to marketing teams. Can they transcend to other non-IT departments like a human resources department or people like that? I think generally Stacey is promoting the idea that these teams are understanding, they're becoming more intuitively understanding the need to be responsive. So I guess the answer to that is yes. But I guess kind of piggybacking on Cliff's question is like what in a mature marketing department that are very nimble and very agile and trying to not do too many things at once and all these other ideas about limiting working process and all that, what does it look like? I'm trying to get a mental picture in my head. What does it look like? We have a big open room of graphic designers and copywriters and they're all bustling around and having conversations? What is that? Because I'm coming from a software perspective, and then when I picture database engineers and front end and back end people having conversations and writing tests and pushing things to production, just help me make that mental picture of what an agile marketing team looks like.
Yeah, well, I think it's very collaborative, right? Very goal focused, very mission focused, right? Here's our mission. And it could be even shorter bursts of time than you might see in IT. It could be like, here's our 1 week mission, 1 week sprint, whatever it might be. We have, this campaign element to deliver. And they're huddling every day, talking about what do we need to accomplish? How can I help you? A graphic designer that is bottlenecked might turn to somebody else on the team and say, hey, can you go on canva.com, which is a simple tool that even I can use as a non-graphic designer and, help me out, create some things, create a mock-up, whatever it is. And trying to get that piece out there really quickly. And then they're huddling again as soon as it gets there and they have results and they're talking about that feedback. Okay, we got, X number of clicks, we get X number of views. Here's the comments. Here's what we could, do in our next sprint to piggyback on what was just done, right? So a lot of that nail it, scale it mindset, like we're going to try a few things. Sometimes it's a play on words, right? So messaging, we're going to test different messaging out. And then once we really know the messaging meets our marketplace, we're going to expand different campaign elements. It's overall, it feels a lot like a well-functioning software agile team. It's not that different. It's people working together with a common goal and purpose and getting rid of a lot of excess waste and process that's not needed, delivering quickly and trying to do what's best for their customer.
So how can people find out about other classes, or rather, what other classes do you have coming up in September and throughout the fall? What's your schedule looking like?
Yeah, well, one thing is I'm excited to have a number of new offerings that, of course, are all remote coming on. We have a certified Agile marketer through IC Agile. That's a collaboration with Rocket9 coming September 16th and 17th. It is 2 days virtual. It's a great certification. Wonderful class, wonderful overview class. On September 24th, we're launching Kanban Marketing Practitioner, which is a 1-day virtual class on Kanban that will be really applicable to how marketers can apply it. And in November, there is a certified Scrum Master in Marketing class that is coming where you can get your CSM. It is the normal CSM, but it is all using marketing examples and targeted for marketers that want a CSM.
Oh, that's spectacular. That's great. And where can people find out more information? Just go to the website, agilifytraining.com?
Yeah, that would be the best place.
As well as this first class coming up with Rocket9, you can go to rocket9solutions.com and find out more information there. Yeah, very good. As far as other questions, and feel free, Cliff and Chris, to jump in. I'm thinking that most of these have been covered, but if there's something that you guys think is missing, by all means, speak up.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. You did mention this a little bit, but I just would like to address it specifically as a video creator who's pivoted more into Scrum mastering and the agile processes. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with making pivots when I'm in the middle of, you know, like a carefully planned shoot and we've storyboarded and scripted, and then, you know, and now we're trying to pivot toward new content. How do you make that work well if you're trying to plan ahead with something that's, you know, you're capturing and maybe your subject matter experts or people that you've recorded aren't really easily available anymore?
Well, I think that the best advice is to do things in smaller chunks. So your video clips, maybe they're smaller content things, and then you build off of those. So small segments that maybe build into a larger segment. So for example, when I am putting together a video class, or I'm thinking about it like by a topic, right? And eventually I want all these topics to flow together as one large content piece, but I'm looking at them as individual things, and I'm building them kind of one at a time that could run independently, right? But together you might be able to have like a whole library of content, or package that up somehow. You just wouldn't want to think of that whole package from beginning to end. You want to think about those little pieces of content in between that can add value that you could get out there.
Yeah, that resonates with me right now. As an independent trainer and coach now, it's like, oh, how do I see like the big picture, and how do I aim for something that's going to be delivered as a large kind of holistic package of content, but in the production elements of it, how do I not lose track of that, you know, in the day-to-day?
So I use this approach really myself for my own business and for my own transition of content to online for Agile Marketing. So I started with a lot of like mini courses. I'd have a client that said, can you do a 2-hour Kanban class for me? So I would deliver this 2-hour Kanban class, and I would see what worked and what didn't work, and say, okay, well now I have 2 hours out of a 6-hour class built. Now I tested it, I learned from it. Now I can go ahead and build that bigger thing that I could then sell to more people. Same thing with the IC Agile class. To me, that was a bigger undertaking. So I actually started much smaller with some non-certified things, did some smaller classes, private things that I could put together more quickly at the beginning of the pandemic and see what really worked before I really invested in that full solution. So I use these things. I don't just talk about them, I really do use them in my own work. And I use 1-week sprints and a Trello board like you would not believe. And so that whole limiting work in progress and trying not to go start something before finishing something, trying to think about minimally viable product, I do that every single day, and I'm a company of one.
Yeah, I've actually got my wife serving as my Scrum Master, so she could remind me to do these things.
Right.
I'll take on all the other roles. Great. Are there any other questions that you want to ask us, or maybe any other messages that maybe you want to share with an audience right now before we wrap things up?
I would just say, if you are an Agile coach and you're looking to expand your organization to get your marketing teams involved, getting them to attend one of these trainings is a really good starting place, because they're going to learn that they can apply it in their world, that it's not just for IT. It's not those IT people telling them to use their process, because that can sometimes not work, right? It can sometimes be like, well, that's good. Almost everyone I hear from, it's like, that's good for you, but not for us. And so giving them something that they can get their head around, that they can start with. And it's even as simple as just having them begin with like a daily stand-up, right? Start having that rapid communication. Marketers totally get that idea of communication. Most of us are pretty good communicators in general. And so instead of selling people right on Agile in itself, try to sell the value on it and why it's important, right? Getting better messages to your customers, being able to reply quicker to your customers, get them what they need in real time. So those are things that marketers really value.
I have a question, Stacey. Does the way in which a marketing department achieve agility look differently if you're business to business versus business to consumer, or is it pretty much the same?
I don't see a really big difference there. I probably see a bigger difference whether it's agency driven versus corporate driven in marketing. That's where I would see a fundamental difference, and the type of culture that they have already. So a lot of times that agency culture, there's no process in place. They might be very agile already, but they also have no structure and they're running 100 miles an hour and burning people out. So that's kind of that one end of the extreme. So you're almost using Agile to slow them down and to be a little bit more thoughtful and to think about strategy and to think about what's really important. Then on the other hand, I worked with like financial institutions and more traditional companies that are very, very slow to get anything to market. They're very process driven. And so it's that other end of the extreme where we're trying to then like get rid of some of that corporate bureaucracy to build in agility. So kind of depends on the size of the organization and then agency versus whatever. Agencies also typically are supporting multiple clients at once. So pure Scrum doesn't often work for them. Maybe a Scrum Kanban hybrid works better, or Kanban in general, just because they don't have a clear product or product roadmap or any of those things, right? They're managing multiple clients, multiple deliverables all of the time. And we also see that with any kind of what I call, kind of a component team. So content marketing sometimes is a component team in a larger company. So they may work a little bit differently than a cross-functional team.
I have this sort of general, not a marketer, so this is probably a very simplistic view, but I have this sort of general idea about how the fundamental change that marketing's experienced. I think about marketing teams a long time ago, pre-social media, pre-internet, where they had to expend a lot of effort going out and extracting data from consumers, like what their preferences are and things. And now it's sort of turned over because now people are freely volunteering their consumption behaviors all the time, every day on Instagram and Facebook. And so I feel like marketers used to have to go out and harvest data, and now they're overwhelmed with data and they have to find a way to sift through it all and find patterns and make sense of it. It's equally difficult job, but kind of flipped on its end. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is true. There's a lot of data out there right now. And it's what do you do with it? How do you successfully use it to inform your decisions? If your marketing plan is too locked down, that data doesn't mean anything, right? You're not gonna apply it anywhere.
So as we wrap up here, Rocket 9 Live, Cliff, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Vic. We're excited to be teaming with Stacey for a class in a couple of weeks. If you'd like more information about that class, you can go to rocket9solutions.com/agile-marketing.
Great, thanks very much. And I want to thank all three of you today for joining me here on this conversation. I know that it was a short time and we could probably talk a little bit more. I'm very excited, and I think you might find me in a class upcoming, Stacey. This sounds really riveting stuff. So thank you to Cliff and Chris and Stacey for being a part of the conversation today. And listeners, enjoy your coffee with friends.